Hey, this is Craig from Line Service in Charleston, West Virginia. We're going to make a video about our new two-piece carrier bearing for the Polaris RZRs. For those of you that have ever replaced your factory carrier bearing, you know how difficult it is to get it out of the machine because of its size. It's real bulky, and you have to remove clutch housings, coilover shocks, rims and tires. It's quite a job to get that out. We designed this carrier bearing housing to make maintenance a breeze on or off the trail. It is a two-piece design. Once this is mounted in the chassis with these two bolts, if you ever have to change a bearing, if you ride hard like we do here in West Virginia and you got a lot of creeks and mud holes, you simply remove these two bolts, 4mm bolts, come out. This bearing retainer plate slides forward. The drive shaft can then be lifted up, and the rear shaft can be slid out the back of the machine with just a small bearing on it. No need to remove anything, no rims, tires, or anything. That's why we did that. We also offer a HD version of drive shafts for the RZRs with Spicer greasable U-joints. The factory drive shaft tubing is this one here. It's 83 wall. Our upgraded version over here is 120 wall. You can see the difference in the thickness of the tube. We feel that that is sufficient and not overkill. You have to imagine when you're jumping these RZRs and out there carrying on with them, if you jump on and land under wide open throttle, the drive shafts have to have a little bit of torsional flex to them in order to help save other parts like ring and pinions, axles, transmissions, etc. So these are a really good upgrade for you guys that want to push your RZRs a little harder, and we have several out there. People are giving us good feedback on them. They beat them every weekend, and these drive shafts are plenty strong enough, believe me. They're not overkill once again, and they're not too heavy, and they don't rob a bunch of power. So we're going to shoot a video with K&C Fab. We've used his RZR now for several thousand miles, and his unit has pushed it to the test. So we're getting ready to pack this bearing. I'm going to hold it up here just really close to the camera. We started just a little bit of it right there, but these bearings from the factory have hardly any grease in them whatsoever. You know, there's different makes of bearings. Some are cheaper than others. This is kind of a mid-grade bearing here. You know, you can buy the Timkins or anything you want. This is a mid-grade bearing, and we're going to pack this and make it a real nice bearing. So basically, this seal was on there. Okay. We took our pick and we dug in right behind that, and we picked it out a minute ago. It's really easy to do if you got a good sharp pick. That's Harbor Freight right there, not expensive. Just pull that seal off and it exposes all your roller bearings. So we're going to take, this is a needle greaser is what we call it here, and this is for your button head grease fittings, and it works really well with packing these, or at least getting them full inside the seals here. So we're going to go ahead with the help of Kevin here, start greasing this bearing up. Just take your time and turn it around and just put it to it here. Keep going. Getting it pretty full here. This is a really good grease from Valvoline. I highly recommend this grease to everyone out there. We use it a lot. That should do it, Kevin. We use it all the time on our off-road buggies. We got rock crawlers here, mud boggers, constantly out in the elements. And this grease tends to hold up really well. It's if you can see it here, it's Valvoline Cobalt, pressure activated. It's highly water resistant. Does very well for everything we do. So you get that grease in there, and you just take your seal and with your fingers just go around it, push that seal right back down, and it's sealed, resealed. So then you just, as you turn the bearing, you'll immediately notice the resistance with this grease in here. It's like not hard to turn, but there's a good resistance to it, and the more you rotate it, the more that grease just works in around all those ball bearings. It's going to make a nice piece for our shaft here, because like I say, we did not pack this one, and it's pretty well shot. I know you can't hear it, but you can almost see the notchiness in it. It's just wore out from not having enough lubrication. Okay, so now what we're going to do is get ready to remove this bearing and install this one, so we can get this shaft put back in the machine. If you do choose to use a vise on these drive shafts, you always want to be careful and don't clamp it down too tight, because you can bend the drive shaft tubing. This is actually a 120 wall, so the factory shafts are only an 83 wall thickness. These are much thicker and will withstand, you know, a lot more torque, pressure, and also a vise clamp. But if you do use a vise, be careful, just get it, you know, tight enough to hold it from spinning. Don't overdo it. A lot of people overdo it. If you bend this drive shaft, it will pull the drive shaft at an angle, and it will cause you a horrible vibration. I'm going to use this puller and pull this bearing off, and then reinstall the other bearing here. Should come off pretty good here. Okay, getting ready to put this new bearing on the drive shaft, and Kevin's got it here. The way we like to do it, like I say, we always try not to vise on the tubing. So you can simply just turn this yoke 90 degrees and lay that down on the floor. That'll keep it from trying to buckle when you're hammering it down. So we're going to turn that yoke over, lay it right here against the concrete floor, and then what we're going to do is we clean this area where the bearing rides on the stub with brake clean, and this is the bearing that we packed earlier. So there could be some grease in here, so what we're going to do is just take a little bit of brake clean on a rag and hit that. I wouldn't spray it directly on the bearing because it could penetrate that seal and get in there and mess up your grease job. So we're going to wipe the inside of this bearing with some brake clean and a rag. Remove any film that could be there and let that dry just for a second. As you all know, it dries very quickly. We're going to take some Loctite. We have blue here. That's what we use a lot. We do a lot of differential repair here, so we use a lot of blue on the gear oil stuff. It tends to hold up very well. We're going to put us a bead of Loctite inside of here. Be kind of liberal with it, because you know, too much is better than not enough. Get that inside of that, and we're going to turn that bearing over, drop it down on the stub, and we have a small piece of pipe here, okay, and it fits. Here's the old bearing. It fits just the metal part right here, okay. You don't want to use something that's going to contact the plastic seal, okay. Most people already know that, but just in case, you know, if you've got a piece of pipe laying around and it almost works but not quite, don't take the chance and use something that's going to contact that plastic seal. You got to contact that inner part of that bearing. So we're going to take this and just put it right down on here, and Kevin's got his safety glasses on now. No metal shards in the eyes. Can't steer the RZR through the trails if you've got one eye out. Give it a few more taps just to make sure we're seated down. Okay, we're all the way down. If you want to show them there, Kevin, it's right down to the shoulder there. There's a shoulder back here that needs to bottom out on to make sure it's in right position. So now that we've got the bearing on the shaft, we're going to wipe a little bit of this excess Loctite off of here, and we got us a good bearing going there now. It's good and tight on the shaft. That's the one we packed earlier with the good grease, and we're getting ready to install this back in the machine. So it's very easy to change these carrier bearings. So before we actually install this shaft back into Kevin's Rzr, when you go to remove this out of the machine that's going to be in there like this, leave these 2 bolts alone. You can't do that with the OE stuff. That pops off like so. So, you know, once you get that off, this carrier bearing raises up out of this housing and it slides all the way out of the back of the machine. This stays in play exactly where it was. You know, you got cooling lines over here that's hard to get to that bolt. This one's hard to get to because of the console angle. This simply slides out the back of the machine. You can do exactly what we just done. Remove your carrier bearing, reinstall a new carrier bearing, and this can be done on the trail very easily. This is why we feel that this bearing housing is the best out there, because this can be done on the trail without you know, using a bunch of fancy tools. So once you've replaced that, you know, this thing will just slide right back in. It's tight, but it will fit below the body of the machine. You don't have to remove your skid plate. This is all done from above, and then you drop that back in and you slide that back into position like it just was. I'm not going to slide it in there again. It's like I said, it takes a little finesse. And now if you are on the trail or in your garage replacing this carrier bearing, when you go to move this back in, you don't want to hit here on the tip of this stub with a hammer, because what that'll do is loosen up your bearing. We just put that Loctite on there to keep that bearing tight on that stub. You don't want to do that. It'll drive that through. So if you have to peck on anything, you might peck here with say a rubber mallet or something. I wouldn't get too carried away. If you have to, loosen a bolt on either side to get that to wiggle. But more than likely, if you just move the rear of the shaft and get that a straight 90-degree shot, and take someone and just get your thumbs in there and push it back, that bearing will just seat. I'm just going to go ahead and just slide it right back on there. You've seen it go all the way in. Okay, so do not hit right here and loosen the bearing that you just pressed on there with your pipe or your piece of wood, whatever you used. Okay, so we're getting ready to install our new carrier bearing housing in the chassis. Okay, you want to notice that these cooling lines running right here on the passenger side, they can be a little bit aggravating. It never hurts to have a friend over here on that side, on the passenger side, to maybe pull, because this is all plastic right here. You can manipulate it a little bit just to help get enough clearance. It don't take much, okay, because your bolt hole's here. So if you don't have a friend and you're doing this by yourself, you can put you a pry bar in there. Just be careful not to dent and damage your coolant lines here. You don't want any leaks while you're out on the trail. So we're going to take the bearing housing, and this is the prototype bearing, so it don't have any of the anodizing. Our logo's not on it. This is the one that started it all for us. So we're going to take the housing by itself, and we are going to turn it and go ahead and feed that passenger side in underneath the cooling lines and lay it right in there over top of where the bolts hold it down. Take this bolt and this washer, Kevin just pulled that over, and we're going to hand start that bolt in the threaded nut that's mounted to the chassis. Get that started, and you don't have to tighten these down all the way at this time. You just want to make sure you're in there. And actually, it's a good idea to leave this housing loose at this time, in case you need to do some wiggling. You can do so. So we got the passenger side in. We're now going to install the driver's side. And once we get it started straight, should go pretty good there. It's going now. Okay, so what we got is our carrier bearing housing mounted loosely in the RZR. Okay. Next, and also I want you to note that with our housing, this sets well below most of the cooling lines. I don't know if every single RZR on the planet, if these lines are in an exact position, but you can see Kevin has taken a zip tie here and actually got, you know, this stuff is up out of the way. You may have to do something like that. If this line, if this lower coolant line rests on the carrier bearing housing, that could rub a hole later. So I recommend taking and pulling these up just a little bit, taking you some heavy duty zip ties and tying that up, keeping that from rubbing a hole in that later. We have, like I say, we've got a couple thousand miles on this test unit, and no holes, hasn't been rubbing at all. So we're going to leave this loose for now, and then we're going to go grab the rear shaft, and we're going to actually get ready to install both front and rear shafts in this RZR and show you how easy it is. We are getting ready to install our drive shaft assembly in this RZR. So what I've done is I have inserted this front piece of the drive shaft in from the cup holder area. We took the front of the drive shaft and slid it just off to the side of the it's laying on the skid plate up front, just right beside of the front output on the driver's side. That allows us to come forward enough to get the two pieces in. So what we're going to do is lay this down off to that side, and I'm going to go to the back and video Kevin installing the rear drive shaft in from the left rear corner of this machine. So with everything still attached, the wheel, the coilover, the clutch housing, everything is still intact. We have taken a floor jack and lifted up on the frame, and that allowed the suspension to droop out just enough to allow easy accessibility in from here. Now you can do this without doing that. It just makes it easier for this video to go ahead and jack that up. So Kevin's going to now install the drive shaft with the stub and the carrier bearing in first. Here's our phasing mark. He's going to put it right through up underneath the clutch housing here and slide it right up into position. And then I'll go up and grab it and assist with the phasing of the two drive shafts. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our bearing retainer plate here, and we're going to reach in and get our drive shaft and just guide it right over top of the housing. Okay, now that's good, Kevin. We're in far enough, as long as you get on the rear diff. So what he's going to do now, he's slid it in far enough, and the rear slip yoke, the very back of the rear drive shaft, Kevin is going to go ahead and spline it up on the rear output. Okay, so he's on there. Okay, now I'm going to slide this bearing retainer plate over this stub like so, and this front, I got to get it right there, and we're going to drop this in. Let's see. No, we're actually going to come back here. We're going to match these phase marks up. My hands are probably in the way, but now if you can look, here's a phasing mark, here's a phasing mark. They are lined up. That'll keep everything balanced. So we're going to go ahead and slide that up there. Then Kevin's going to push the drive shaft forward some. We're going to drop it down into position. And we're going to take our fingers and do a little bit of wiggling and pushing. And now that you got it, Kevin, the carrier bearing has now seated into the housing all the way. This retainer plate will simply slide on like so, and then there are two 4mm bolts, Allen head bolts, that will go in like so. I'm just going to get these hand tightened for now. Just get them started. That way everything's lined up. The two outer bolts are still loose, but they're in there. And then we have the other 4mm bolt that's going to go in. I know my hand's probably blocking the light and the view of everything, but we're going to tighten those up just by hand for now. And then while we have been doing this, Kevin has been making his way around the RZR to the right front, and he's going to be able to grab that front drive shaft, and he's here in a second you'll see it slide back. Like I say, we are lined up on our phasing marks. He's going to slide it back, and then he's going to line up the front end yoke. There is a drift pin that goes through there, but we recommend using a through bolt with like a lock nut of some sort. That way, if you have to do this on the trail, it's actually much easier to remove a through bolt than it is to actually carry a 1/4 inch punch and a hammer to knock that drift pin out. And once he finds it could take a little time. If you slide it on there the first time and you miss it by a little bit, just slide it back, and then slide it back up on there. And once you get the hole lined up, you are basically you're all in. And then all you have to do is tighten down everything and put your console back on and slide your seats back in, and you are finished. So you got it, Kevin?
Nah, it's in.
Okay, so he's in. To keep the video short enough, all you have to do is install the drift pin in the front. Now that you saw the shaft come back to the housing, you saw it slide back forward. You can now install the drift pin or through bolt. Then what you do is you take your 4mm Allen head, tighten these two bolts here, this one and this one. You want to snug those down. Don't over torque these because these are small bolts. Once the lock washer collapses, you're only talking about 1/4 of a turn and you're tight. You'll feel it get tight. I don't have a torque spec on that, but just don't overdo it. And then once you get these two bolts here snug, you just take your 17 mil on your socket, or your socket and your ratchet and your extension. Just put that in. You tighten this bolt down, and you're pretty much done as far as bolting the drive line in. Then you want to take your grease gun, and if you're on the trail and you don't have a grease gun, that's fine. As soon as you get home and get a chance to do it, then by all means do it. But take your good marine grade grease of your choice, grease this slip yoke, grease this U-joint along with the front U-joint and the rear U-joint, and the rear slip yoke has a grease fitting on it as well. Once you get all that greased up, you slap your console back on, put your seats back in it. Okay guys, this concludes our upgraded carrier bearing and heavy duty driveline install in this 1000 XP. If anybody's interested in purchasing one of these carrier bearing assemblies or the drive shaft assembly, just visit us on drivelinewv.com, or go to Facebook under Line Service Charleston, West Virginia. You can find out all the pricing and everything you need to know on there. I want to give a special thanks to Kevin and Christina Weiss at K&C Fab. They build these awesome bumpers, kickers, anything you need bent or built for these RZRs. They can handle it. I appreciate them. This machine's got over 5,000 miles on it. They beat it just about every weekend. These folks ride like they're designed to be ridden. They don't pick blackberries with this thing. They go out and hit everything. So I'd like to let Kevin say a few things here.
Well, you just about said it, Craig. I enjoyed the install and everything. It was good. The drive shaft's awesome. I'm not lazy on my machine. We rock it. Drive shaft seems as good. It's over 2,000 miles. Like I said again, K&C Fab. If you're looking for any bumpers, kickers, whatever your needs may be for your machine, just give us a shout.